Good morning to all of you. Today is sort of our youth weekend. Some of you were here Friday or Saturday night for our school play, our Living Wisdom School, which goes up through middle school, not into high school. Every year does a theater performance. We can't call it a school play because it so far transcends it. We call it great art with short actors. Because it's really fine art, and it's fine spiritual art, because every year the subject is some great spiritual figure. And so the children, the teachers, those adults of us who get involved to help for the theater season, get immersed completely, and in fact it's a curriculum for the whole year in whatever figure we're doing. Last year it was Mirabai, who was a great devotee of Krishna. The year before, it was the life of St. Francis and St. Clare. This year, it was the life of the Dalai Lama. So many of us had the opportunity to step into the world of Tibet, the world of Tibetan Buddhism, which, speaking for myself, and my part was to gather and assemble, sometimes make, with a lot of help, the costumes that the children wore. It's a completely foreign reality to me. In fact, for weeks ahead of time, when I really should have been at work, I didn't have the foggiest idea where to begin, because I just couldn't even grasp the aesthetic. I finally said to David, something else is going to happen, because I don't think God is just going to abandon me to be frantic in the last weeks. And in fact, we discovered this marvelous, rich, abundant Tibetan community, and they have a Tibetan opera and dance company. Who would have ever thought, unless you were part of that world? And generously, with completely open heart, opened up their costume closet, and then the local monks opened up the tankas that they use when the Dalai Lama himself comes, and we really had a glorious experience. And what happens with the magic of theater, because we were working on the costumes, we were here a lot when Matthew was directing the play and helping the children, and he's very demanding of the children. He gives a great deal and expects them to give their best also. And when they weren't living up to what he wanted them to live with, he was giving them a rallying conversation and reminding them of many things he taught them. He said, what's the most important thing an actor can have? And the children said, a voice, breath, confident stance, all these different things. No, he kept saying, no, that's not right. And finally he said, imagination. And then he said, are we in Lhasa? And the children said, no. Are you really Tibetan monks? No. Are you really the Dalai Lama? No, they said. He said, but you have to have the imagination. You have to have the imagination to feel that that's exactly what's happening. And then he added later a marvelous thing. He said, you have to tell the truth in an imaginary world. Isn't that remarkable? Because once you have imagined yourself in Lhasa, then you have to be absolutely true to that non-existent reality. And I thought later, isn't that exactly what we're doing in our whole lives? Are we really egos? No. Are we really captured in delusion? No. Are we really separate from God? No. But we imagine that we are. And in this case, it's not a virtue. In the case of being an actor, it's a virtue. In fact, it can make you quite famous and rich and a huge celebrity. But here, no. Here it makes us less than we really are. So our job is just like an actor's job, which is to tell the truth in this imaginary world. Because even though it all seems this way, and even though we've devoted ourselves for really quite a long time to imagining this reality, now it's our job to tell the truth within it. Because it has its own rules. Just like the rules of the stage are very exact. Matthew would be very strict with the children. Would Harry S. Truman fidget like that? We had these world leaders on the stage denying help to Tibet. And this one little boy was Harry Truman. The boys would stand like this. Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, he would say like that. And then he would say, we're sorry, Tibet, we're not going to help you. That was the part. And then as soon as he was done, he would kind of go like this. He could hold it for his speech. In rehearsal, for in the performance, he was rock solid. But Matthew said, well, I believe you when you're talking, but Harry S. Truman was a grown man. He could control his body. You know? So they would have to be true in the imaginary world. They had to tell the truth. Harry S. Truman would not fidget after he had just told Tibet he wasn't going to send military assistance. You know, it would just be the way it was. Because those are the rules of the stage. And so here we are on this stage, which we happen to think is real because we're crazy and we have vivid imaginations, you know, but there are truths here that we also have to live by. And what we have to live by is kind of reversed. What an actor does is they know who they really are and then they have to pretend to be somebody else. We have to know who we really are and stop pretending to be somebody else. It's exactly the opposite. And what we accidentally think we are is this limited being. We accidentally think that all of this incredibly complicated and really truly impressive and quite remarkable self that we have created is really not our true self. And instead of acting the part of this ego with all its attachments, we have to deeply and profoundly act the part of a pure and simple child of God who happens to have wandered on this stage and is now just sort of, you know, moving through this world. This is what our scripture says. If you would realize God, if you would be close to God, you must act as if you have Him already. And that's not a falseness. I know the inevitable thing, you see, the line that the ego feeds you, and the line is the prompter. Whenever you sort of forget your lines, it tells you, no, you're not you. Maybe him, maybe her, look at that one, they've done so much more, look at all the bad things you've done, not you. Everything is made of divine stuff, but not you, not you. Of course, not you, and not me, and not him maybe her. You know, it just divides it all up. But the truth in this imaginary world is that we are all expressions of that divine spirit. We spend so much tremendous energy, Swamiji writes in commenting, in the more extended commentary on this particular passage. He's talking a little about the astral world because Jesus also says this week, he says, no one descends, you know, from heaven except he who came from heaven. No one lives on this earth except the divine one. And that is not everyone who lives on this earth has descended from the heavenly realms. And he's not trying to say just I, but he calls himself Jesus who is in heaven. And of course, Jesus is standing in his own body, clearly there on earth. They could shake his hand, they could feed him fish, they could relate to him just as easily and as dynamically as we relate to each other. And yet he declares, even though he's sitting right in front of him, that he's also in heaven. And so, well, theologians have tried a long time to figure out what that means. But what that means is that he is not limited to the imaginary world, that he sees himself living here. He knows himself to be the child of Joseph and Mary, carrying out this particular duty. He knows which body is his. There's enough of a veneer of understanding of that he can move through this world. At the same time, he never loses sight of the fact that this very same consciousness which inhabits the body is also infinite. Now, see how differently we would relate to this world? Isn't the way we relate to this world so much based on the fact that we feel ourselves to be so small? Like, what if I don't have a job? What if I don't have the house that I want? What if I never get married? What if I can't have children? You know, all these little things that I want, and I've drawn a picture like this. This is where my happiness comes from. And if any of those essential elements are gone, then I am bound to feel badly. You know, we feel almost obligated. Something bad happens, we have to, it's very important, you know, that we suffer. If we accidentally just sort of manage to go cheerfully through it, someone will accuse us of denying the truth, you know? But that's the imaginary world that says all these little things are the quality and the nature of our happiness. That's why Jesus could walk into that reality of being arrested and humiliated and tried by Pontius Pilate in front of a screaming multitude of people who wanted him killed like this, and be so utterly centered in the true reality that he didn't even bother to answer. I mean, it's one thing to say someone can be strong, but he didn't even bother to answer. He just stood silently. And the judge who had the power either to kill him or release him, this is Pontius Pilate, one of the great villains of all of history, even his name, isn't that marvelous? Pontius Pilate, that just the sound of it. And there he is, and he was not so dense as to not realize he's a man who'd seen lots of criminals. He knew what a criminal looked like. And he could tell that Jesus wasn't a criminal. I mean, most criminals are frightened or egoically aggressive or angry or violent in their nature, and Jesus was none of that. Because even as he stood in his body, he was telling the truth in this imaginary world. He was holding to the power of the infinite, just acting through this body, in his case entirely to set the example and to teach us how to be in this world in the face of such a reality. And Pontius Pilate really didn't want to be responsible for the execution of this man. There's stories that are told that his wife had a dream of who Jesus really was and sent a message to her husband, do not be responsible for the death of this man. And here he is, and all the powerful people in his society, the stories are told that they incited the mob to cry out for the death of Jesus, and Pontius Pilate's trying to get out of this impossible position. And he basically, of all things, turns to Jesus to help him, probably sensing that he was the only guy in the whole crowd who knew what was going on. He says to Jesus, don't you know that I have the power to have you crucified or to set you free? So Jesus takes this moment to speak. You have no power over me except that my Father in heaven has given it to you. Don't imagine for a moment that you are really the power in this world. There is only one power, and that is God. Then he says, even now, if my Father willed it, legions of angels would come to rescue me. But this is what must happen. Because we're all so afraid in this world. We're so afraid of so many things because we identify with this ant-like consciousness. An ant is naturally a little nervous, An elephant is less afraid. And an infinite being has absolutely nothing to fear. It's magnificent to act as if you have God already. Just to put yourself in the consciousness, not just in meditation, but just walking down the street. What would it be like to walk down this perfectly ordinary street and simultaneously be conscious of the infinite force just moving through me? I was with Swami Kriyananda in all places in Disneyland in the mid-70s. Disneyland used to be a little more innocent than it was, and Swamiji used to like to go there. We would go to Los Angeles for various reasons, and crowds of us would go to Disneyland. And one year we were there because we were doing some conference, in the 70s, the things that they had, that kind of, where everybody would get together. And Swamiji was part of one of those, and we all in those days were much more Indian, and we were all wearing Indian clothes. Swami wore his orange Indian robes. We wore saris, and the men had on kurta pajama, the Indian style clothes. And we were wearing them for the conference, and for some reason we decided to wear them to Disneyland. Who knows what we were thinking, but we did. And we were with Swamiji that day, and he, now, this so many years later, he's in his mid-80s, he's elderly. Well, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, he was not elderly. He was very dynamic, could walk very powerfully, very strong, and just had a will and an energy that was just way out ahead of all of us. He knew exactly where he wanted to go, and there were about 12 of us. And he was always in the first unit of whatever it was. And then before everyone else had even sort of changed their energy from whatever ride we had been on, he was streaking out across to the other. We were actually holding hands, running through Disneyland like this, trying not to get separated to keep up with him. It was a marvelous day and very playful, very in the midst of everything, divine joy. Then it was time for the electric parade, where they all come down dressed in beautiful lights, very astral, and we wanted to be able to see it, so we went early to a place on the sidewalk there, and others were gathering, and just all of a sudden the mood really began to shift. And Swamiji got that look in his eyes, where his eyes are slightly raised, and he sort of, you can tell he's looking out at this world, but he doesn't see what we are seeing. I always want to be inside of his consciousness at that moment. And we had carved out our square like this, and he turned to us and he said, imagine being every single one of these people. And by that time there were hundreds, perhaps thousands of people within our sight, all different kinds of people. He said, not merely loving them, but being one with everyone's consciousness. He said that was Master's state of consciousness. That's the state of a self-realized Master. And then this, just right in the midst of Disneyland, this power just descended on our little group. And Swami just sat right down on the sidewalk, and this, like 10 or 12 of us just sat on the sidewalk right next to him, and we just started meditating. And I don't know how long we meditated, because we sort of came out of it when the parade was right in front of us. And it's just sort of, we opened our eyes, and we, for just a moment you're not sure where you are. And in that time, the whole sidewalk had filled in around us. So we were this odd group of meditating yogis in the middle of Disneyland with everyone else standing around us, and then this light parade comes in front of us. It really couldn't have been a better way to come out of it. But just the extraordinary example that the lives of these great souls give us, you see, is multidimensional. It's not just sort of standing back. When we really enter into it with the realization of what's going on here, it's the power of Jesus facing death and humiliation and torture without a moment's hesitation, with the absolute certainty that God is with him, and there is a purpose behind it. It's going to Disneyland and just having more fun than the kids are having, because you have this adult freedom that you can do. It's all of a sudden, in the midst of it, just the power of Spirit coming in and surrendering to that completely. Some people imagine that even-minded and cheerful is dull. What would it be like if I didn't have my moments, of all this kind of thing? Well, what it would be like is blissful, because that's really what it's like. But even deeper, even much deeper, much more compassionate. What blocks us from being able to love one another? What blocks us even from being able to be ourselves? What is it always? Self-concern, fear. Self-concern, fear, self-concern, fear. Self-realization is not like a magnificently huge, bigger than ever sense of me and mine. I was so charmed once. It's so easy to project upon short people greater consciousness than they actually have, just because their egos are not quite fully expressed. And this little child about 2 or 3 was in the arms of its mother, and it was singing some little chant, and everybody's so charmed. Oh, what a saintly little being. Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. And then suddenly the mother held up the bottle, and the child says, mine, 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 mine. Just like that. We're just like that, aren't we? We go for a moment into the Spirit, and then something happens, and it's mine, mine, mine. Sometimes, just for fun, we sing that chant, Lord, I am thine, and instead we say, Lord, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Just joking about what we would be, might say seriously on another occasion. I was watching when Matthew was working with the children about a week before the performance. Things are building, and some of these kids are quite small, and Matthew, being extremely talented and a tremendous actor himself, he was standing right here, and there were the 60 children in front of him, and he, in this extremely exaggerated way, he said, I woke up this morning and I realized that the play is just 1 week away. 1 week, he goes like this. And then he says, and there's so many things to do, and I'm so afraid about them. The music. And then he goes, the music, like this. And then he says, and then he asks the children, what else is there to be afraid of? And the children start shouting out all the things that are scaring them, And each time they say one, he does some huge gesture of total anxiety. until he's totally wrapped up in this fear. And then he says, "Can anybody help me?" And then he has the children tell him back all the things that they've learned about how not to be afraid. You know? And it's just like, that's really what the masters do, isn't it? They come in this world and they live a life. They try to accomplish things. They don't have the money. They get sued. They get slandered. Sometimes they get imprisoned. Sometimes they get beaten. Every once in a while they get killed. You know? And they act it out. And they don't stand just indifferent to it. You know, they don't just sort of go through. They live it with full vigor and determination. You know, Swami moved faster through Disneyland than any of us could move. It was just, we're here, let's live it completely. Let's tell the truth in this imaginary world, which is there are many waves on this ocean. It's not always light, it's not always easy. Sometimes things are very, very, very difficult. That was above all the life of Jesus. Jesus was like, okay, let's make it as hard as we can make it, and let's still tell the truth. Jesus went through all of that, and how did the life of Jesus end? The disciples are gathered for fear that they too might be arrested, and they've locked the door, and they're in the room together. They don't know what to do, and suddenly Jesus appeared in the midst of them. "Peace be unto you," he says like that. Because even though it looked like he had been crucified and had died and had been placed in the tomb and the big rock had been rolled in front of it, nothing had ever touched him. Because it had happened to his body, but it had never happened to him. Because even as he lived in this world, he was also in heaven. Is this easy? No, nobody said it was easy. But it's very, very simple. When these kids were chanting just a little while ago, Om Namo Narayana, you sing that song, Hey Bhagavan, that means, Oh Lord, Om Namo Narayana, sing the name of God. And those words, there's just those ancient words. And, you know, Master's beautiful chants, listen to my heart's song, door of my heart, open wide, I keep for thee. So chanting is such a powerful practice. You just say that, Om Namo Narayana. What do I need with a big house? What do I need with 5 cars? What do I need with a closet full of clothes? Om Namo Narayana. That's all there is. You know, if God gives us more, then we take more. If God wants us to be luxurious, we accept it. If God takes everything away and reduces us, Om Namo Narayana. It's only when we don't have awareness of what we really need, which is the awareness of God, that all of these other things seem so important to us. Jesus didn't have to discipline himself to be courageous. He had to work hard to keep his mind even conscious of the fact that, oh, they're torturing my body. You know? Because even as he was on this earth, he was in heaven. If we would know God in that way, live now in that truth. Bless you.